I have no idea why they gave me this early time slot. I'm usually dead to the world at this hour, but I really appreciate you all getting out of bed to come and hang out with me. My name's Laura. I'm the convention's resident history nerd. If you go on the website, I wrote the history of the history of Lancaster page for the website and stuff. So they get me to do things like this. I am going to make one thing very clear right up front. There will not be a test. I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and most of it is what you'd probably call useless, or at least my mother would. So hopefully you're going to come out of this having learned something interesting, or at least found something that you'd like to watch or read that you didn't know about before. So this morning we're going to be talking about the mythology of the ancient Celts and how it still impacts our media today, thousands of years later. Do any of you have Celtic ancestry? All right, there's a lot of us. I myself am more Welsh than anything else, and Scottish runs a close second. According to my Ancestry DNA results, I'm more than half Celt. Hey, cool. I always knew about the Welsh part, because my grandmother's grandmother came from there when she was a little girl, and I have the family Bible, but the Scottish was a surprise. But I guess it explains why I like bagpipe music. I do, I always did. So I've always loved the Celtic mythology, and I've always wanted to talk about it more, and most people don't care, so it's exciting to be accepted to do this panel. So I'm going to start with showing you a map of the 6 nations, and those are the 6 remaining Celtic nations in the world. You notice they're pretty much all of the British Isles or thereabouts. If you attended the panel I did last year about Welsh history for the Renaissance Fair theme, this might look a little familiar. So at its absolute height, the Celtic territory included a massive swath of mainland Europe, and that included almost all of France and Portugal, large parts of Spain and Germany, part of Italy, and there were even a few satellite settlements in places like Bulgaria, Turkey, and the Ukraine. That was in the 3rd century BC, so it was a little while ago. Over the next several centuries, their influence started to dwindle, and that leaves us with the 6 nations. They have continued to have significant numbers of speakers of their Celtic languages well into the early modern era and even now. I am going to talk a little bit about the languages before we get into the mythology because frankly they're kind of confusing, and I had to understand what I was looking at in order to talk to you about the myths. Just like there are 6 Celtic nations, there are 6 Celtic languages, and they're not all Gaelic. Once upon a time there was a single Celtic language, as you see up there at the top of the tree. The old Celtic language was an Indo-European parent tongue, and they carried that with them as the empire spread, and of course as it shrank and the nations became more separated from each other, the languages evolved. Like I said, this is kind of confusing, but from what I've read on the subject, the original Proto-Celtic tongue was broken into 2 branches called Insular and Continental. Insular was restricted to what we know today as the British Isles, and that was further divided into those 2 you see up there, Goidelic and Brythonic, Goidelic being Gaelic. The languages of Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, and Manx Gaelic are derived from Goidelic. Welsh, Cornish, and Breton, which is the language of Brittany, are Brythonic tongues. And the chief difference between the 2 is that the Goidelic languages have a K sound, where the Brythonic languages would use a P sound, so the Brythonics are sometimes called P-Celtics. I know that sounds weird. And there was also a 4th Brythonic tongue called Cumbric. That was spoken in the Scottish lowlands and the very northernmost counties of England, but that's considered extinct. And all of the continental Celtic languages are also extinct. Language goes extinct when it no longer has a single native speaker remaining. And in fact, Manx Gaelic actually was extinct, and so was Cornish because their last native speakers had died out, but they've been revived. Cornish died out as a spoken language when its last fluent speaker died in the 18th century, but fortunately there were several written works that survived which allowed it to be brought back, but a lot of it was missing. So Cornish today is not actually pure Cornish. They borrowed from Welsh and Breton to kind of stitch it back together because they're similar. It's a linguistic chimera. And Manx Gaelic stopped being a functional community language about 100 years ago, which is not helped by the fact that it's only spoken on the Isle of Man, which is like that big compared to the others. So it's really tiny, but recently there's been a push to bring it back. The island actually has its own dedicated radio show in Manx Gaelic. All right, so Next, I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of the 6 nations and their individual myths, and then I'll talk a little bit about the ones that they share that kind of spread out over the area. My maps all come from different places. Thank you, Google. So none of them match. I'm going to start with the Isle of Man since it's the littlest, and it's roughly 3 times the size of Washington, D.C., to give you an idea. We have states that are bigger than this island. Its name in Manx Gaelic is Ilan Banin, sometimes also called Manin. And that funky little symbol up there on their flag is called the Manx Triskelion. It is said to be a representation of the idea that whatever way you throw it, it will stand. Please don't ask me what that means because I don't have a clue. Maybe it just means you can't keep a good island down. Probably due to the similarity of their languages, the mythology of the Isle of Man is closely related to that of Ireland, especially the tales of, okay, excuse me while I mangle this. I always thought it was pronounced Tuatha De Danann, but apparently it's the Thua Heyday Danon. I had to write that out phonetically in my notes. These were a race of supernatural beings, kind of like demigods, and they were immune to aging and illness. They also feature in the Scots Gaelic traditions. Now, the Isle of Man gets its name from Manannán Mac Lir, Mac meaning son of. Lir was the Irish god of the sea, and Manannán was one of his children. Legend has it that he was the one who brought the island up out of the Irish Sea, so it was named after him. Seems reasonable. His wife was Fand, who was the queen of the Muinjer Vegi, or little people, what most would call fairies. It's said that she still lives on the island somewhere in the hills. And in the city of Douglas, there is actually a bridge formerly identified as the Fairy Bridge, and it's not a good idea to cross it without yelling out, "Good morning, little people," or something to that effect. Apparently they don't like it, and your time on the Isle of Man will not be pleasant. Then there are the Benvari and the Dinimara, which we would call mermaids and mermen. A lot of cultures have merpeople, but the ones on the Isle of Man are said to be nicer to people than most of the others. The Benvari would sometimes help people find lost treasures, that's the mermaids, while the Dinimara, the mermen, would punish the greedy, but they were kind to lonely bachelor fishermen and helped them catch fish. In fact, a lot of the Manx mythological creatures come from the sea or the waterways on the island, which makes sense since there's water all over the place. So next we're going to go to Brittany, which is in the north of France, and it's separated from the other 5 nations by the English Channel. Its Celtic name is Breeze. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's sometimes also called Armorica. And during the medieval era, it was divided into 4 major bishoprics. That is their flag there. It's called the Gwen Hadu, and that means black and white, because clearly they are a very creative people. Their 4 dialects, one for each of those 4 bishoprics, are called Leoneg, Tregirieg, Kerniveg, and Gwenedig. Gesundheit. They are all pretty similar, but Gwenedig apparently does require a bit of study in order to be understood by people who speak the other 3. Eventually, as time went on, Breton kind of got replaced by French as the dominant language. It still has survived, but there was a push in the 19th and early 20th centuries to drive it into extinction, which is a common theme throughout the Celtic nations. We don't like your native language, we want you to stop speaking it. No. Fortunately, it failed. And as of recent years, there are at least 500,000 people in the Brittany region who can speak and understand Breton. They unified their spelling system after a few centuries of confusion, and most of their schools actually offer bilingual education these days. The Breton people are descended from the Celtic Britons, who crossed the English Channel in about the 3rd century and brought many of their tales over, giving Brittany a Celtic mythos similar to that of Wales and Cornwall, plus a dash or 2 of Norman French. It's early. Okay, one of their more curious legends, I wish I had more pictures to go with the legends, but I wasn't sure what to use. One of their weirder things is called the Corrigans. Now, what's a Corrigan? That depends on who you're reading, because the authors don't seem to agree when they write down the legends about what this thing is. The Barra's Breeze, the Ballads of Brittany, was compiled from oral traditions in 1839, and according to that, the Corrigans are fairies, now kind of like the Muinjer Vegi on the Isle of Man, but calling them Corrigans separates them from the Names, which are the dwarves. I find this absolutely hilarious because I study Welsh on Duolingo, and name in Welsh means grandmother. So apparently the dwarves are grandmothers, I don't know. This version also suggests that they are evil spirits who are basically sentenced to a timeout here on Earth. But other writers have claimed that the Corrigans are basically sirens. They have beautiful golden hair and red flashing eyes, and they try to lure men into their beds and then drown them. They also like to steal human children or replace them with changelings. One ancient Breton poem claims that there are 9 Corrigans who dance with flowers in their hair and robes of white wool around the fountain by the light of the full moon. Another myth, which is entirely unique to Brittany, is that of the city of Ys, Y-S. And it once stood on the northern coast. It was a walled city ruled by King Bradlin. He built it at the request of his daughter, Princess Dahut, who loved the sea. He had a palace of marble, cedar, and gold. The city was very wealthy, and it had a thriving arts community. Unfortunately, Princess Dahut accidentally opened the gates to the sea. The ships would come through, and the whole place flooded. Some versions of the legend have Princess Dahut as a sorceress who had tamed sea dragons and gave them to the people. In most versions, she herself drowns when everybody else does, but some tellers claim that she became one of the Corrigans. Okay, so that's Britain, or Brittany. We're going to go back across the English Channel now to Cornwall. And you can see there, it's kind of like a little tiny leg that sticks off the very bottom of England. And they are even more creative with their flag than Brittany. So, yeah, you might know this already, but the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall are these days lesser titles belonging to the Prince and Princess of Wales. But it is one of the 6 nations, and its ancient name is Cernow. Cernow of Cornwall. I'm sorry, that's a dad joke. It's dedicated to my stepdad. He told me to use humor today. I hope he's watching. I don't know if I'm being put on Zenkaikon online, but if I am, I hope he's watching. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, the Cornish language did go extinct a while back. It had a lot of English influence even when it was being spoken fluently, but by the 1600s it had died out in all but the most western part of Cornwall. And it was only sometime in the mid-20th century that they started coming back with it. The last person died in the 1800s who had spoken it. But it survived in the written form thanks to a book called the Vocabularium Cornicum, or the Old Cornish Vocabulary, and also thanks to something called the Domesday Book. Does anybody know what that is? Okay. The Domesday Book was an account written in the 1080s. William the Conqueror, after he came over from France and decided he was going to run England, wanted to know exactly who owned what and how much of it in England and Wales. So he sent people out to perform what they called the Great Survey. And the Domesday Book is an accounting of who owned all the land in England and Wales at that time, and some of the records are written in Cornish. What I found very interesting while doing this research, not just the fact that it's the best place in the United Kingdom to go surfing, but Cornwall has among its Celtic myths one that you probably all know. And I'm not talking about King Arthur, although they do like to claim that he was conceived and possibly born in Tintagel Castle. I'm actually talking about Jack and the Beanstalk. You all know that one, right?
Yeah.
Jack the Beanstalk originated as a Cornish myth about King Arthur's court. According to them, Jack was a young man in Camelot who slew a number of giants and eventually earned a spot at the Round Table. I don't remember ever hearing about Sir Jack, but I guess he's there. One of those giants was said to live on St. Michael's Mount, which is a tidal island joined to the town of Marazion by a granite causeway, just like Mont Saint-Michel in France. And of course, another one required him to climb a beanstalk to find the guy. Most of the other Cornish myths I uncovered were actually related to Jack, and one for each of those giants, and eventually he married a duchess. But one that isn't, and I thought this was extremely interesting, is the story of, get back there. This thing is very touching. The story of the Mermaid of Zenor. And to the Cornish Celts, the mermaids were symbolic of the spirit, and even now, mermaids still figure into a lot of the iconography of Cornish churches. So the story goes that this exceptionally beautiful and elegantly dressed woman started attending services at St. Sinara's church in Zenor. She sang hymns with them, she had an enchanting voice. Nobody knew who she was. She would just sort of disappear at the end of the sermon. She was coming there for many years, never seemed to get any older, and people just kind of went, okay, this is a thing. Well, eventually, a young man named Matthew Truella, who was the best singer in the parish and the son of a church official, fell in love with her, and he accepted her invitation to follow her home. They were never seen again. However, some years later, a ship dropped anchor in Pendor Cove, and a mermaid popped up out of the water and said, "Would you please pull up your anchor? You're blocking my door and I can't get to my children." And they were like, "Okay, we're freaked out, we're leaving now." So they did. The story did eventually get back to the people of Zenor, and they thought, "Oh, that's what happened to Matthew Truella. He married a mermaid." Sure, we'll go with that. To this day, a chair in St. Sonara's church depicts a mermaid. People can't seem to agree whether that was the chair where she first sat when she sang the hymns with them, or if it was made after the story came out. We're okay. Okay. Since we started a little late, I wasn't sure. All right, now we're going to come to my favorite of the Six Nations. This is my ancestral homeland of Cymru, or Wales. Welsh is the language that would like to buy a vowel, please. And if you can read any of what's on the map, you can see why. Actually, of the surviving Celtic languages, Welsh is the healthiest. It has the most native speakers. In fact, almost all of Northern Wales in particular is completely bilingual. All of the signage throughout the whole country is bilingual. It's written in both English and Welsh, which is very exciting to see when you go there. As with most of the other Celtic languages, there was a concerted effort to drive Welsh into extinction, and that was started by Henry VIII. Yeah, like we don't have enough reasons to smack him upside the head. And his father was born in Wales. I mean, come on, guy. But it was never completely successful because the people went, and they taught their kids in secret, and they hid their Welsh books, and it survived, and now it's gotten back to its proper place in society. They have the coolest flag. I'm biased, but still. Wales is the home of King Arthur, no matter what Cornwall might like to say. And I mean that genuinely, because there are actually a few hints that Arthur was a real person, or at least was a couple different real people rolled into one. For one thing, there is the Book of Taliesin, which is the oldest known record of Welsh myths. Taliesin was the chief bard of all of Wales, and they say he was Arthur's court bard. Not exclusively, he wandered, but when he was at Arthur's court, he was the head bard. And we know for a fact that he was a person. You know who else was a real person? Merlin. Merlin existed, believe it or not. I can't promise you that he was a wizard, but he did exist. The main reason we have to think so is because of the Welsh town of Carmarthen. That is the English name. In Welsh, it's spelled Caermurdin, which pronounced Caermarthen, and that literally translates as Merlin's city. He founded the city. He either actually was or was just based on a person known as Merlin Wilt, who was regarded as both a prophet and a madman. Make of that what you will. King Arthur is, of course, the most famous legend to come out of Celtic Wales. Is there anybody here who doesn't know who King Arthur is? Oh, good. We don't have that kind of time, because once I start talking, I won't stop. But he's not the only legend. There's the Mabinogion. That's a collection of ancient myths, which is largely focused on deities and kings. These include Lear the Sea King, just like in Ireland, and his children include Bran the Blessed, Branwen, and Manawydan, who is almost certainly the Welsh version of Manannan, who raised the Isle of Man up out of the Irish Sea. There's also a wizard named Gwydion, who is frequently associated with Merlin, but he's a lot more of a trickster and not a very nice person. Branwen, the daughter of Lear, is the subject of one of the legends in the panel's name. You know, I say it was Banshees and Selkies and Cauldrons on mine. Her husband, thank you for that. Her husband, Matholch, the King of Ireland, had a magic cauldron, and it could bring the dead back to life. By, just throw the body in there and it'll pop back out ready to go. I'm not kidding. So Bran found out that Matholch was mistreating Branwen, and so he said, "Well, I'm the king of Wales, and I'm coming over there to beat your ass." But he got there with his army and found out that the Irish could just keep throwing their dead warriors into the cauldron and bringing them back to life, and that was a problem because he couldn't do that with his people. The only way to destroy the cauldron was to have a living person jump into it and sacrifice themselves, because they had to die in order for the cauldron to lose its power. So Bran and Branwen's half-brother Efnisian made that sacrifice to end the battle, and it destroyed the cauldron and killed him. And as I say there at the bottom of the list, dragons are real in Wales, and I know that because I was there and I saw one. I'm not talking about the flag, I'm not talking about the statue, I'm talking about this. Do you see the dragon in the clouds? That was at Castle Conway. I took that picture and went, wait a minute, and I zoomed in on the lower corner of the picture and went, oh my God, that's a dragon. And if you look, it almost kind of looks like it has the first claw raised, like on the flag. So the flag of Wales, the dragon on the flag of Wales was over Castle Conway. I was the only one there who saw it. I don't know if that means anything, but I like it. All right, we're going to come back to the last two Six Nations, and these are the ones that most people think of when they hear the word Celtic. So we're going to go to the Emerald Isle first. Thank you to Wikipedia for this map, which shows the breakdown of the ancient Irish kingdoms. And now today we have Ireland and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is still part of Great Britain. Ireland is independent. That was a whole big mess in the 20th century. It's most obvious when you're in those countries and you look at their signage. Ireland is like the other Celtic nations. Its signage is in both English and Irish Gaelic. But if you go to Northern Ireland, it's all in English. I don't know why. But this is what the country looked like as far as divisions went in around 900 AD. Now, like their cousins on the Isle of Man, the Irish Celts had a strong belief in the Dua Hede Danon, and in Gaelic that translates as people of the goddess Danu. They were believed to have lived in Ireland prior to the arrival of the Gaels, that's the humans who spoke Gaelic, and they fought a number of battles prior to that with their enemies, the Fomorians. Well, after they defeated the Fomorians and the Gaels showed up, they kind of went, screw this, and moved underground and became the Fair Folk. One of these is Cleodna. She's the queen of the Banshees. She reigns as queen over the Sheog, the fairy women of the hills in South Munster. Banshees are female spirits who appear before the living as an omen of death. They usually wear white, sometimes green. They have long red hair most of the time, and they tend to scream. If you see one banshee, it means somebody in your family is about to die. Probably not you, but sometimes. If you see a lot of banshees, it means that somebody very important or very holy is about to die, not necessarily one of your relatives. Now, the Irish do have a tendency to mix their mythology and their history, so sometimes it's hard to know which is which. And this is best exemplified by something called the Cycles of the Kings. The court poets would write down the deeds of their various kings that they served, and they got passed down through history, and sometimes they got turned into fables. Some of them were almost certainly not true, like the tale of Sweeney, who ruled part of northeastern Ireland until he was cursed by St. Ronan, and then he became half a man, half a bird. And he spent the rest of his life hiding in the woods so his friends wouldn't find him and laugh at him. I wish I was making that up. But then again, the Cycles of the Kings also include the tales of Brian Boru, who was a completely historical figure. He was the High King of Ireland in the late 900s, and he's thought to be the one who have ended Viking raids on the island. You might know that the harp is one of the symbols of Ireland, and it's specifically the harp of Brian Boru, and they keep it under glass at Trinity College in Dublin. Now, admittedly, this is my picture. Admittedly, it probably was not actually his, but the legends insist that it was, and whatever it is the oldest known surviving Celtic harp. Whether he ever actually put a hand on it is unclear because they think it may have actually come later than him. But it's made of willow and oak. It has 29 brass strings. It lost one, it was originally 30. And it has a silver neck mount and embedded crystals, which suggests that it belonged to a master musician. So that was a cool piece of history to look at. All right, now we're at the largest of the Six Nations, and that, of course, is Scotland. And it's divided into a couple of different regions, as you can see. We've got the lowlands, which is where it borders England, and we've got the highlands, which is where the mountains are. And then we've got a bunch of those outer islands, the Hebrides, the Orkney Islands, and way up north we've got the Shetland Islands, where it's always freezing. And yes, that is where the cute little ponies come from. Scotland actually has two non-English languages. One is Scots Gaelic, and the other is just called Scots. That's spoken in the lowlands, more strongly resembles English than Scots Gaelic does, and there's an ongoing argument about whether they are actually two different languages or if Scots is just a dialect of Scots Gaelic. Scotland became united with England as a result of the Tudor era. Henry VII's oldest daughter, Princess Margaret, married James IV of Scotland, Their son was James V. James V and his wife Marie de Guise had 3 children, but their 2 sons both died very, very young. Their daughter was only a week old when her father died, and you might have heard of her. She was called Mary, Queen of Scots. She had a very happy childhood in France with her beloved first husband, but after she was widowed at the age of 18, it all kind of went downhill. She did remarry. Her son by her second husband became James VI of Scotland, and when Mary's cousin Elizabeth, the Queen of England, died childless, she named him her successor, and thus the crowns of the island were unified. Sorry for the tangent, but I have feelings about Mary, Queen of Scots. That said, Scotland is very Scottish. The land of kilts and bagpipes takes fierce pride in their history and their culture, and that of course includes their myths and legends. Now, Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, is the most famous of the Scottish legends. She's not Celtic. She only dates from 1934, so she's less than 100 years old. What happened that year was that somebody took a picture of what looked like a dinosaur sticking out of Loch Ness. Loch is Scots for lake. And ever since then, people have been going over and going, oh yeah, I see her. I don't see her. I felt like I had to include her just because she is so iconic. Scientists in 2003 performed a sonar scan of Loch Ness to find the monster. They found no trace of her. So either she doesn't exist, or she's really good at hiding.
It's a cover-up.
It's a cover-up. That's also a good viable theory. I know which one I prefer to believe. She just doesn't want to be found. All right, Scotland shares a number of its legends with the other Celtic nations, particularly Ireland, and that's because a lot of Celts immigrated from Ireland to Scotland around the time that the Vikings were invading. And of course, they brought their stories with them. However, the islands in Scotland do have some myths which are unique to them. And one of those is the Selkie. Has anybody ever heard of a Selkie? Oh, good. For those of you who haven't, a Selkie was basically a human woman who could put on a seal skin and thus turn into a seal. Selkie is the Scots Gaelic word for seal. There were a number of stories told about a man who encountered a beautiful woman sunbathing on the beach, and he stole her seal skin and made her marry him and have his children. Years later, she found her skin, said, screw this, I'm out of here, put it on, and went back into the water, abandoning her children. And in some versions, she does come back and visit them once a year, occasionally bringing them treasures from the deep. In other versions, she already had a husband of her own under the water, and she was really not happy about this situation. On the Shetland Islands in particular, it's said that the Selkies are kind of like sirens. They entice humans to fall in love with them, and then they drown themselves out of despair. Now, I did mention that there are some legends which crop up all over the Celtic Islands, and of course one of these is King Arthur. I don't think I need to talk about him too much, but another, which is illustrated in these giant statues, this is not my picture, I wish it was, are the tales of the water horses. The Scots call them Kelpies. This statue is called the Kelpies. It's actually modeled on 2 real horses, I'm told. They call them Kelpies. The Manx call them Cabal Ushti. The Irish call them Puka. And to the Welsh, they're the Keffel Dŵr, which literally translates as water horse. Whatever the name, the stories are pretty much the same universally. They are beautiful horses, usually black, sometimes white. They come out of the water, although which water tends to vary by where you are. In Wales, they usually come out of rivers or mountain pools. In the other nations, it's more often the sea. They entice the unwary to pet them or ride them, and once the human is touching them or on their back, the horse either runs out in the middle of the sea or flies up into the sky, and either way they vanish and drop the person to their death. You can actually catch a Kelpie, some of the legends say, and make it work for you, but it's not going to end well. So these are some of the many legends which have survived for more than 2,000 years. And part of the reason that they have survived is because they keep getting recycled into modern media. Again, I think the biggest example is King Arthur, whose stories have been told and retold so many times that it's almost a running gag. These are just a few of them. Merlin up there at the top left, that was a miniseries in the 90s with an all-star cast, Sam Neill in the title role. It had Helena Bonham Carter and Rutger Hauer, and for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, that had Lena Headey, Cersei, as Queen Guinevere. The King Arthur film next to it with Keira Knightley and Clive Owen, that was a reimagining of the legend where Arthur was a Roman officer for some reason, and Guinevere was a Scottish warrior maiden. That Merlin television series at the bottom there is probably very familiar to some of you. And that was a series about Merlin growing up in Camelot as Arthur's personal servant, and trying desperately to hide his magic because it was outlawed. First Night with Sean Connery focused on the legendary love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot. Not a bad movie. Quest for Camelot. Yes, that is a largely very silly cartoon with an awesome soundtrack in which the daughter of one of Arthur's knights teams up with a blind hermit and a two-headed dragon to save Camelot from Gary Oldman. I mean, somebody has to do it. The Sword and the Stone, if you're of a certain age, that was probably your first introduction to the Arthurian mythos. Hi, Gen X here. And it also features the only known version of Merlin to wear Bermuda shorts. Finally, this down here is called Avalon High. It's a little obscure. It was a Disney Channel original movie in 2010. I saw it. It was pretty good. It's based on the young adult novel of the same name, loosely. And it's about a group of teenagers at Avalon High who find out that they are the reincarnations of Arthur, Lancelot, Merlin, and a few other characters from the legend. Spoiler, the blonde girl is Arthur. It was really interesting to watch. Also featuring King Arthur are a bunch of video games. I just want to gush for a minute about two of my particular favorites. The series on the left is called New Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It's up to 13, maybe it's 14 now, installments. It's a collection of time management games about John and Mary. They're an ordinary couple from California who, as you do, accidentally end up in Camelot. They were at Stonehenge on a vacation and something went wrong. Somehow they got mistaken for a knight and a sorceress and went, okay, sure. So she actually became one and he's actually a knight. And it's a very silly series, but it's also very smart. It utilizes some of the more obscure Arthurian myths, which is really cool. And it has dragons. They're pets. I love it. The other one I'm showing here is the final installment of a series called Hidden Expedition. It's called A King's Line. It takes place in Wales, and it manages to be a completely fresh take on the Arthurian mythos, but still remaining true to the old legends. Not to shill, but I bought all of these from bigfishgames.com. So if you're interested, you can go there and download free trials to see if you want to buy them. Play them for free. All right, now we've got Brave. You've all seen Brave?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't talk too much about that. The legend in the movie about the brothers, the one who turned into a bear, as far as I can tell, that's not an actual Celtic myth. It could be that I just haven't found. But the way King Fergus's people defer instantly to Queen Eleanor, and the way she's trying to teach her daughter to be a good future queen, that's inspired by the matrilineal traditions of the Pictish Celts. Pictish is one of those dead Celtic languages. And you've all seen the movie. Do you remember young MacGuffin, the one that nobody understood what the heck he was saying? He was not speaking gibberish. It just sounded like it. He was actually speaking Doric, and that is a dialect of Scots Gaelic. And once you know that, it's actually a little easier to understand him because he can sort of pick out words. All right, so moving on. These are three movies that I bet you would not think of as being related to the Celts, but they actually are. The plot of Hellboy 2 is loosely based on the Irish tales of the Tuatha Dé Danann. Prince Nuada and Princess Nuala are the children of Balor, who was the leader of the Fomorians, their enemies. Part of the plot involves visiting the Giant's Causeway. That is a place between Ireland and Scotland said to have been built by the Irish giant Finn McCool, yes, that is his name, so he could cross the ocean without getting his feet wet. Now, Jack the Giant Slayer is a film version of that Cornish Arthurian legend about Jack the Giant Killer, and yes, it is every bit as goofy as it looks, and it is silly and fun. It's like good for everybody. Ewan McGregor is in it, in one of his absolutely most entertaining supporting roles ever. He's a really good guy. He has a great big laugh. It's fun. He's also very capable with a sword. Now, as for Prince of Thieves, I'm going to be honest, I unironically love this movie. I know it's not good, but I love it. It hits a sweet spot for me. Robin Hood, of course, is not of Celtic origin. But during the movie, the witch Mortiana advises the sheriff of Nottingham to recruit the beasts who share our God. And he says, "You mean Celts? They drink the blood of their dead." I don't think they actually did that. I could be wrong. It's hilariously inaccurate because, apart from anything else, the Celts weren't even existing as a separate culture at that point. The closest thing he could have found to a Celt was a Welshman. And they were all mining coal. They also didn't worship the devil, but they're still in the movie. There is a funny scene. I don't know if it's in the theatrical cut, but I have the extended edition with all the deleted scenes. And there's a point when the Celts are swearing their allegiance to the sheriff, and the one takes a burning ember out of the fire and burns himself in the hand as proof of his loyalty. If you watch in the background, he walks away going, ha ha! Kills me every time. I can't even pay attention to what's really going on. Some of the best fantasy literature derives from Celtic mythology. Now, I'm going to admit, Lord of the Rings is a little bit of a stretch, but it's a valid theory because some of Tolkien's descriptions of the elves sound a lot like the Tuatha Dé Danann. They live forever, they don't get sick, they don't age, and the means by which the Tuatha Dé Danann defeated the Fomorians are very similar to both the fights with Smaug and the final defeat of Sauron. So it is a working theory. That middle one is The Daughters of Ys by M.T. Anderson and Joe Rue. It's a graphic novel that debuted in 2020, and it's based on that Breton legend of the city of Ys and Princess Dagwood. It shows her perspective during the whole situation. And I haven't read it yet myself, but now that I know it exists, it's on my list. I found it while I was researching. That last book, though, I know very well. That is The Chronicles of Bretagne. Those are some of my favorite books of all time. They are great for all ages. I was reading them to my 10-year-old sister. When she was 10, she's 40 now. It's been a while. They are based very heavily on the Welsh Mabinogion. Bretagne is actually the Welsh word for Britain, and many of the character names are taken directly from Welsh legend, including Taliesin, the chief bard. A lot of the words in that book are completely unpronounceable if you don't know anything about Welsh. So, like, there's a character whose name has 2 F's, and 2 L's, and 2 D's, and I thought it was pronounced Fluter, and here, going by the rules of Welsh pronunciation, it's actually Luther. I looked at that one, wait a minute, Fluter Flam's name is Luther Lamb? All right. It's still a great series of books. They revolve around a young man named Taran, that's him holding the sword there. He is an orphan. He was found on a battlefield and raised by a wizard in a place called Caer Dallben. And he goes on adventures with his companions. These include Princess Eilonwy of the red gold hair, and the aforementioned Luther Lamb, who is a minstrel, who's also a king, but he prefers being a minstrel. And there's an animal thing called Gurgi, and the book doesn't really make it clear what he is, but he's Taran's best friend. If you ever saw The Black Cauldron, Disney's forgotten masterpiece, yes, that is named after and loosely based on the second book in this series. Very loosely based. It's not a bad movie. I do like it, but it's best taken as its own thing and not as part of this. For one thing, Eilonwy never introduces herself to anybody as Princess Eilonwy, and the bauble doesn't float. Sometimes the Celtic influence in our modern media is more subtle, and you might not recognize it for what it is. Does anybody here play Dragon Age? I know you do. I know you do. All right. Has anybody played the Elder Scrolls? Okay. They both have Celtic influence. Has anybody played Trevelyan in Dragon Age Inquisition? That's my canon. Trevelyan is a Celtic legend from King Arthur. It comes from Cornish mythology. One of their Celtic legends is of a realm called Lyonesse, which was said to lie between the southwestern tip of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly in the Celtic Sea. It was said to be a beautiful little kingdom. It gets mentioned in the Arthurian legends a bit, but it was destroyed when the entire place was swallowed up by enormous waves in a single night. Like it never existed. Kind of like that one Tevinter country that was swallowed, or city was swallowed up by the sand. But the legend persists of a man named Trevelyan, who managed to escape from Lyonesse on the back of a white horse. And to this day, one of Cornwall's oldest families, the Vivians, claim to be descended from Trevelyan, and they use his coat of arms, which depicts a white horse in a blue sea. And as you probably know, Trevelyan's coat of arms in the game has a horse on it, and that's why that's on their tarot card. It is thought that Lyonesse may have actually existed. They are working to determine one way or another. They're trying to figure out, dig up the remains. Now, if you've played the Elder Scrolls, and it looks like a lot of you have, you probably have fought a Spriggan or two. Spriggans are also derived from Cornish legends. And they are apparently the ghosts of giants who guard buried treasure. I mean, you may notice if you kill a spriggan, it does have some treasure lying around somewhere. And like in the Elder Scrolls games, they use whirlwinds to fight or frighten their enemies. And they just look like walking trees. But the Elder Scrolls also have, and I'm sure you twigged to this immediately, the race of humans called the Bretons. Now you know where that comes from, too. So these are some of the many, many, many modern pieces of media inspired by the ancient Celts. I hope you found something today that you're interested in checking out, or if not, maybe you can delve a little deeper and find something that does appeal to you. This is me thanking you for coming to the panel in all 6 of the surviving Gaelic or Celtic languages. I couldn't find any of the dead ones, I'm sorry. I appreciate you being here. If you've enjoyed listening to me babble about history, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, I will be in Live 3 talking about the history of Lancaster. And if you're over 18, you can also come to Staff Against Humanity tonight, which will be in this room, and you can watch me humiliate myself. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate you getting up for this. We still got a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
The Isle of Man had the fairies were the winter begging, right?
Yes.
Does that mean that fairy tales from the Isle of Man were actually begging tales?
Oh my God. You have no idea how angry I am that I didn't think of that. Thank you. Yes.
The cartoon saloon movies, like, just like, what would you like to say with the Irish influence, the Celtic influences of those would be like?
On what?
The cartoon saloon movies, you know, Songs of the Sea.
Oh, I completely forgot about them. To be honest, I've never seen them. I've only seen them advertised. But yeah, that's true. There are cartoon. Is it called Cartoon Slew?
Cartoon Saloon.
Cartoon Saloon. Okay. They have a series of movies, animated movies based on the Book of Kells, and I think there's one about Selkies, isn't there? Yeah. I wish I thought of that when I was doing this panel. I was so nervous coming up with this. I'm like, I gotta find cool stuff. I gotta find cool stuff. Didn't even twig that. So yeah, check those out too. Anybody else?
When in doubt, just go to make rank order stuff and just like, okay, how many Welsh people are in here?
In the back?
I heard that Banshees are based off the leading women tradition of like at funerals they have these mourners and they like lose their mind, like full float, and that was their job. They go to like funerals and it's very dark to people.
Oh, okay.
What do you think about that?
I did see something, excuse me. I did see something about the Wailing Women tradition. I didn't realize it was connected with the Banshees that closely. I know that there are stories of women who have suffered severe heartbreak or mental illness becoming Banshees after death. But I wasn't sure how closely connected that was to the Celtic tradition as opposed to something that came up later. So that's why I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't include that just in case I'm wrong. I hate people.
Don't we all?
Don't we all? Yes.
I'd like to suggest a series of books. Granted, they're for, I guess they're J books in the library. Is The Dark is Rising series by Susan Cooper.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Most of the things in there are based on art.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But the action takes place in Cornwall and in Wales.
Oh, awesome.
For the most part.
Well, now I'm going to have to read them. All right, so that's
And for the younger, anybody younger.
okay. That's the Dark is Rising series. It's a young adult series, and
Yeah.
she recommends it because it takes place in Cornwall and Wales and is based on Arthur. So, Susan Cooper. All right.
Although it is a modern tale, but with, yeah.
Nice. Thank you for that. Thank you. All right. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here at Zenkaikon, and maybe I'll see you at one of my other 2 panels, or tonight at the Staff Against Humanity. Thank you again so much for being here.